is.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me on. Film Florida is a not-for-profit trade association that represents all aspects of the screen production industry. And we've gotten away from saying film, television, digital media because if it's entertainment on screen, it pretty much falls under our umbrella. So we've been around for 26 years. It's a membership-based organization. We have members from Pensacola to Key West, so literally tip to tip. All aspects, crew, cast, film commissions, labor organizations, schools, students, hospitality, a bunch of film commission or a bunch of film festivals. So pretty much anybody that works in the industry is represented within the organization. And overall, the goal is to just grow and strengthen the industry in any way we possibly can.
Yep. And Two Stories is a member, and we've been very proud to be a member for years. We actually, the different tiers and memberships, right? Mm-hmm. We actually upped ours a few years ago and went up a tier, mm-hmm. realizing that we can aid monetarily while also getting our name out there a little bit more.
Yep.
That's the only reason Film Florida exists is because of the membership fees.
We are 100% funded by our members.
Yes.
So yeah, our ability to do literally anything exists. My ability to have a job as the executive director is completely dependent upon whether or not our members see fit to join and renew each year, because that's where all of our funding comes from. And we have a number of different membership tiers, and obviously we hope people go a little bit higher because it helps us financially, but we do our best to try and give back to those members and give them a good return on investment based on logo placement on different things and highlighting things on social media and those type of things. So we appreciate you guys sticking with us through the years.
Going to continue to do so. All right, so I actually wanted to start with kind of just, I've always wanted to ask you this. Mm-hmm. Being the executive director, you've seen a lot, you've done a lot within Film Florida. What is just one awesome story? Just going to give you the floor to tell us a fun project, a cool travel moment, a cool place, a cool person you met. Just what's that one story that you're just like, all right, 4 years ago this happened and it was just really cool.
So I really don't know that I could boil it down to one, but I mean the things that I really take pride on are when I'll be out and about talking to somebody and I've never met them before. They probably didn't even know who Film Florida was. And then they start kind of regurgitating some of our talking points and some of the important things of why our industry, is important to the state of Florida. And it makes me think, okay, it's working. Like our message is out there. Whether the people know that it came from us is not necessarily relevant, but the fact that people understand who we are and know who we are is reassuring. The other part that I think is really cool in my role, I see my job kind of as connecting dots. And so when somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'm looking for this, and do you have any suggestions? I don't know where to go. And I'm able to go through our membership directory and say, you know what, there's 4 of those that are members. Here are their names. Here are their phone numbers. Go ahead and give them a call or reach out if you need it. And then to hear that they did connect and it did work out, that's really cool. Our organization has grants and scholarships for students and young filmmakers. And, we get inundated with submissions, and some of them are really good. Some of them are really not good. But you kind of get in this lull of, well, it's just more submissions. We'll evaluate them. We have a committee, and then some get money, some don't, all that. But then to find out 6 months, a year, 2 years later, that one of our films that we gave money to is premiering at the Florida Film Festival or the Fort Lauderdale Film Festival or Miami Film Festival. And then you hear people send you pictures of, there's the Film Florida logo in the credits for partially funding. It's like, okay, this is working. This is worth kind of the pain that we all go through sometimes. And so, there are success stories, and I think just like anybody else, it's easy to kind of fall into a rut. But when you kind of sit back and think, where we started from as an organization, which was long before me, where I started with the organization more than 8 years ago to where we are now, membership is more than doubled in that short period of time. And we're doing a lot more. And so when you actually sit back and kind of start checking off what it is we have accomplished, it's kind of cool. And I mean, selfishly, like, the podcast for us, we're in our 7th season now, more than 130 episodes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And knowing that in 2018, it was just kind of do we kind of want to give this a try? And because in my previous job, I wanted to do a podcast. I thought it was a good idea, but I couldn't wrap my arms around what the hook was for our company at the time. So when I left that company and got to Film Florida, and a couple of years into it, I thought, I still think it's a good idea. I still think it's a good way to get the messaging out there, to meet people in terms of the guests and tell those stories. And so I'm ecstatic that 7 years later we're still doing it, and listenership is up, and people send emails about listening to this episode or that episode. And I was just recently back in my the homeland up in Illinois, and a couple of my friends up there actually said, "Oh, I heard your episode with Melora Hardin, who was on Monk and The Office," and I was like, "Yeah, she was pretty cool." And so they were like, "Oh, yeah, that was one of my favorite shows." So I mean, to hear people actually really listening to the podcast is kind of cool.
How do you see your podcast shaping the film industry here in Florida?
Well, that's a good question. Originally, when we started the podcast, we wanted it to be very Florida-centric. Mm-hmm. And so we did a lot of those interviews. They really absolutely had to have a Florida story, a Florida hook. Most of them still do, but the challenge of a podcast is, like, people will say, "Oh, it's so easy, you just record it and you put it up there and anybody can hear it." And it's like, okay, which is true, but
who's actually going to hear it?
Who's actually going to hear it? And everybody is doing that. So there's a lot of noise out there. And so we have to kind of walk that fine line between, because one of the challenges that I have, and one of the things that I feel badly about, is some of the best stories and some of the best interviews are some of the least listened to episodes, because they may not have name recognition, or they may not have credits that people recognize. And the way it is people, they subscribe, or even if they'll look at the description and say, I don't know any of this, next. And so you do need to have a bit of a hook. And so we really do want to tell Florida stories and things that have Florida ties to them. But ultimately, the goal is to have episodes that people listen to. And so there usually has to be some sort of name recognition or credit recognition. But most of the times, there is some type of Florida hook. I mean, that's the one thing I have learned, is that even when you get connected, because this person will say, "Hey, I have a connection to this person who has a connection to this person who has a connection to this person." And it's like, ooh, that's kind of a somewhat famous name. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, well, what are we going to talk about? There's no Florida. You start going through IMDb credits, and it's like, oh, yeah, they did actually do something in Florida. Oh, they have a cousin that lives in Florida, or they used to spend time on vacation in Florida. So there's a Florida story, Florida hook to just about everything.
And even when you go outside of the Florida stories, I would see that as a big challenge to keep it interesting and try to hook it back. But even when you go outside of the Florida stories, do you notice that the listenership from Florida cinematographers or filmmakers, digital media creators, are those listeners going up regardless?
Over the last 2 years, yes. Our Florida listens and downloads are relatively consistent. And I think that was part of the thing when we got to we're in season 7 now, I would say about season 4, about 4, where I decided like, okay, yes, Florida obviously is our priority, but there is kind of that ceiling of, we've gotten our listens. We've gotten our listeners in Florida. They're here. I don't know how much we're really going to grow. Let's see if we can kind of expand this. And ultimately, we use it as a marketing tool for the organization, and we use it as a marketing tool for the entire state of Florida. So I actually want people in North Carolina or Louisiana or Texas or Oklahoma to hear it and think, oh yeah, Florida, like they got cool stuff going on down there. Let's check it out,
Yeah.
So,
I mean, as the executive director of Film Florida, I would imagine one of your primary goals is to get films to come down to Florida. So if you are reaching outside of here, you're doing your job. Right?
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, our priority is to our members to help them. And one of the ways that we help our members is to make sure there are enough projects and jobs and opportunities and money